I had written in my journal microdosing mushrooms and womb work question mark. It was like this interesting nod from the universe that I had just written in my journal. About a year later, when I have by this time made this decision to go into a deep training around psychedelics, I uncovered this journal entry. And in that moment, I have this download that's basically, if our menstrual cycle impacts everything about our life, it's going to impact the way we microdose and vice versa. Microdosing will impact the cycle. So, how can we look at the struggles and the tricky parts of a cycle and support them with microdosing? And then how can we ask microdosing and ask mushrooms to assist us in our month-long cyclical challenges?
What's up, ladies? Welcome to the health class she deserves, the show where we ditch outdated women's health myths and talk real bodies, real cycles, and real stories. I'm your host, Autumn Paone, and today we are getting mystical. I have always been fascinated by the healing powers of psychedelics, which is why I am so excited to explore plant medicine specifically for women's health with Leslie Draffin. Leslie is a trauma-informed somatic practitioner, psychedelic microdosing guide, and womb mystic. She helps women embrace their bodies, sex, and psychedelics so they can overcome the wound of unworthiness, become free from mental health challenges, and build a life they're excited about. Leslie believes somatic practices like breathwork, paired with sacred earth medicine used in tune with a woman's cycle, have the power to bring us home to ourselves, awaken our authenticity, and heal the trauma locked within our subconscious. Leslie, welcome to class.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we are so excited to have you. So I'd love to start at the beginning because this is obviously not super conventional work. So what really inspired you to begin with womb healing and with psychedelics?
So I think for me, it was my own deep disconnection from my female body and my sexual shame, religious shame that separated me from my body for decades. And then when I came off of hormonal birth control in 2020 and was really forced, thanks to some physical symptoms, to get to know my body, I realized that part of my purpose here on this world, on this planet, in this lifetime, is to break the taboo around female bodies and to, through my own healing, show others the way. And so I started with menstrual cycle alignment, menstrual cycle coaching. At this point, I was still a news anchor, which is another whole different past life. And through the healing of my own womb and the reconnection to my womb, which finally actually happened because I started to work with psychedelic mushrooms, I was able to uncover a lot of my own blocks. Again, really deal with my wound of unworthiness, look at my sexual shame that I had really had, I think, since before my birth and was just exacerbated because I got herpes at age 18. And then really start to help other women move into this place of self acceptance, which I think most of us lack on some way, shape, or form at some point in our life. And so that's really, I think, where I started. It was from my own healing, it was from how potent I noticed my transformation becoming when I started to work with my cycle, and then I started to work with the womb. And then when I added in mushrooms, it was just like this rocket ship to uncover so many things that have been keeping me stuck, both consciously and subconsciously.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. I think that's a very relatable thing when women learn even just this because we're so undereducated when it comes to female bodies that even just the slightest bit of information, I think for a lot of young girls and women is like, whoa, like it's like a
Mhm.
whole brand new opening. I love what you said. You said before birth. Can you like unpack that a little bit for people who are maybe were like, wait, what do you, what does that
Yes.
mean?
So I believe, and I really feel like it proves itself in my life, that we can create, or I don't know if we can create, but in our bodies, there is sometimes stress and predisposed patterns created in us when we're in our mother's wombs. And when we look at things like ancestral and generational trauma, which can be passed down for, I've heard it say, at least 7 generations, which is like 220 years back. These programs can get sort of installed into us subconsciously and unconsciously and be operating within our life now. And so, how this plays out for me is, I was adopted I was adopted by a preacher's family and I spent 1 month in foster care. My birth mother was very, very young. She was 12 when she became pregnant and 13 when I was born. And she did not discover she was pregnant until she was about 6.5 months along because she had had some PCOS and she had a very irregular cycle. Also, she was a child. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like, she did not have a regular cycle. So, in the couple of months that she was conscious of me being there, things happened. Like, she got kicked out of her house. She had to go and live with these basically foster parents for her that were aligned with the adoption agency. And so I'm swimming around in her womb, just getting flooded with stress hormones and flooded with scarcity and feeling unsafe. And then make that worse by the fact that I was born via C-section after a pretty long labor. And then I went into foster care for a month. All of that is sort of this unconscious layer that I have had that's really become uncovered for me of feeling like the bottom's going to fall out all the time, constantly being worried that, I'm going to be left and I'm going to be destitute and that's going to lead to death. And I remembered as a little kid hearing my parents fight about money. And it wasn't really even a fight. I think it was just an argument or a discussion. But I was so activated as like a 5, 6 year old that I had this story in my head that, okay, well, if my dad loses his job, he was a preacher. We lived in the preacher's house, right? The church's house. If he loses his job or if dad dies, we're screwed. And so I was very, very anxious as a child. And so I really believe that that anxiety stemmed from what happened to me before I was born, what happened to me in birth and right after birth. And I mean, this isn't really a broader conversation around adoption trauma itself, but like, I think that all of those things together really laid the foundation for almost my default mode, which was to be anxious, which was to be someone who is a worrier and someone who is an overachiever to prove to everyone around me that I was worthy of love.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of women can really relate to those things even with different backgrounds. I think a lot of us end up in that anxious overachieving state as women. And there's really interesting research coming out now about we've always known that the state of the mother's nervous system will affect the pregnancy and affect the child, but female embryos and female babies are disproportionately affected by the
Yeah,
mother's stress is
correct.
what like the new data is saying. So that's so important.
Mhm.
And the more research we have on that, the more that we can support mothers in pregnancy to, regulate that a little bit.
And what's interesting too is because so what that a lot of that research is showing, and I think one of the reasons why it's because we are absolutely present within our grandmother's womb. Because when our mother is in her mother, we are there as egg. So we are there as cellular memory, right? And so that is very distinct matrilineal generational passed down. But,
Mhm.
I work with a lot of women of color and a lot of what they're experiencing. And I think as a collective, we can also all experience this, but I know it's more prevalent in people of color, women of color. What was happening 220 years ago? Messed up shit. And so even if you were best case scenario in the States, right? We'll just go with the States. If you're best case scenario, you're a white woman 220 years ago, you've got no rights. You're going to get sold air quotes to your husband for some dowry or whatever, and that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you might be a slave. Worst case scenario, you might be someone of indigenous background where you're getting forcibly removed. And so those imprints live within us in our genes, because studies are proving that deep trauma can be passed down as an epigenetic, as a gene shift to later generations. And what's interesting, I think, too, and I'm sure there's some research on it, but I also think that being someone who's very mystical, I don't need a lot of research to prove it. Also, I live
Right.
in a female body when they never want to study us. So I don't need science to back up what I know to be true. But I think that's also why it's really interesting when we see current conscious generations doing this healing work. I think since time is not linear and all things can happen at the same time, we're healing past generations while we heal ourselves.
That's a beautiful perspective. I love that. And it's so true. We the healing that we do because honestly, I think I myself have struggled a lot with as I also come from a religious background, and I thought at a disturbingly young age, I wanted to have babies, like wanted to be pregnant, wanted to like build a family.
Mhm.
And as I've gotten older and like deconstructed from all of that, and with the situation I'm in now, like my boyfriend has 3 children already
Mhm.
from a past relationship. And I'm just, the older I get, the less I'm like, I don't really know if I'll ever be
Mhm.
pregnant, if I ever want to have my own children. And so when I'm doing a lot of this healing, I'm like, obviously it's for me, but also there's a part of me that's kind of like, if I do
Mhm.
all this healing, like it's never going to be passed down. But
Yep.
that perspective, all time's happening at once, and I'm healing past generations. I'm helping especially just exposing my mom even to this kind of stuff, and
Yes.
she's very receptive to it. And so that's really cool to see, and then to think about it, even people who are, in this moment, or from my perspective, long gone, but still are around energetically, spiritually. That's really, really beautiful. I really like that.
And I'm not a mom either. So
Mhm.
I'm never going to have kids of my own. I've made that conscious choice. And so for me, very similar to you, right? Like I have also sat there and thought, well, what's this all for if I'm not
Mhm.
passing it down, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I will say is I really believe in a key tenet of my work is that when you heal yourself personally, you branch that out into your community and then it impacts the collective. So it's your niece, it's your partner's children, it's your neighbor, it's, the person that you see in the grocery store line, right? So it all trickles out like a ripple effect even if you aren't having children of your own, but I had to grapple with that too. So I'm glad that that's something that you're resonating with as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully there are listeners out there who could also resonate with it, because I think a lot of more and more women, at least in the United States, are leaning more towards the no children these days for very understandable reasons. And that also factors in, even if I wasn't in this relationship, that also would be factoring into my decision of just the state of the world right now, and who the hell knows how long this is all going to be going on.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that it definitely probably will resonate with a lot of people, but you're so right. It is that ripple effect out into the community, and it doesn't have to be blood relatives to be
Mhm.
impactful. So I think it's super important everyone remembers that too. So you combine somatics, breathwork, and microdosing, right? So what's the power behind that combination? Can you dive into your method a little
Yeah.
bit?
For sure. So, the power to me behind the combination of branching somatic work with psilocybin psychedelic work is that one, it's really about for me getting into the body. And so, I was in therapy for years. I was excellent at therapy. I was like a straight A student when it came to therapy. And I still lived consistently in my head, was still consistently anxious. And I would leave my therapist's office feeling like that was the biggest waste of time. Right. I could talk about my trauma all day long. And what I noticed in myself, again, sort of referenced this before, was I was living only in my head. From the neck down, it was just like this gray, dull, staticky place that felt completely numb and just, you know, kind of invisible. And so, what I've noticed is that when we pair learning to decipher the sensations in the body, learning to notice what's happening in the body and how those sensations play into the thoughts, feelings, beliefs, stories, memories, trauma, then pair that with tiny amounts of magic mushrooms. What happens is that we forge deeper connections between the mind and body. We can soften what's called the default mode of the brain, where a lot of this like rigid habitual patterning lives. So my rigid habitual anxiety and overthinking lived in my default mode. And it was actually getting re-implanted there with each therapy session I went to talking about my shit because it was just me living in that story. And so with psilocybin, it helps to soften that part of the brain and then turn on other parts of our brain so that we can start to connect new pathways and create new long lasting habits. For me, though, and the bigger shift in my work and what makes mine stand out from what I haven't really come across anyone else doing the work that I do. It's linking it to the cycle. And so, because my work connecting to my body began with me aligning with my menstrual cycle, and then I got a certification, one of the first in the world for like an internationally certified menstrual cycle coach. When I started to eat magic mushrooms, I had this thing in my diary, and I was not at this point planning to ever bring psychedelics into my practice and into my work. But I, had hired a guide and I was doing my work and just working on my own shit. Spoiler alert, it was around sexual shame and sexual trauma. And I had written in my journal, microdosing mushrooms and womb work, question mark. Or like menstrual cycle question mark. I don't remember exactly what I had written, but it was like this interesting nod from the universe that I had just written in my journal. About a year later, when I have by this time made this decision to go into a deep training around psychedelics, I uncovered this journal entry. And in that moment, I have this download that's basically, if our menstrual cycle impacts everything about our life, it's going to impact the way we microdose and vice versa. Microdosing will impact the cycle. So, how can we look at the struggles and the tricky parts of a cycle and support them with microdosing? And then how can we ask microdosing and ask mushrooms to assist us in our month-long cyclical challenges? So I developed something called the cyclical microdosing method, and it is the only protocol that is based on a female menstrual cycle. There are lots of microdosing protocols out there, very famous ones, all by men, and they don't have a menstrual cycle, so they don't know. And so what mine does is it splits the cycle in half. The first half of the cycle being your inner spring and inner summer, which is your follicular and ovulation phases, or the 2-ish weeks after your period is over and you're generally feeling pretty good. During those weeks, you would microdose 2 times a week. And then when your symptoms either pop up or you know you're past ovulation or in the week to 2 before your period, then you would shift to microdosing up to 5 days a week. So what that's doing is it's helping become sort of a neuroprotectant in the space of the cycle where things like brain fog and mood swings can happen as estrogen has its second peak in your luteal phase and then drops. Things can happen where you have like the inability to focus and certainly in perimenopause. And so there are some studies that show that psilocybin, the way that it impacts serotonin in the brain, can be like a neuroprotectant. But for me, even more so than that, what I found is it really deepens the ability to be present in the moment. And for me, that presence allowed the space between a trigger in the second half of my cycle and my response to widen. And so I could take a breath instead of losing my shit. I could pull back before reacting out of anger if something happened that was, beforehand might trigger a mood swing. And so through that cyclical microdosing method, I really started to know myself even more deeply. And when I worked with clients in this method, I've seen things like menstrual pain decrease by 60% in a month. I have seen mood elevate continuously day after day. And more than anything else, what I've noticed is they're not losing days to anxiety. They're not having raging mood swings and wanting to like get a divorce the week before their period anymore. And all month long, they're able to just settle. And instead of living in this constant state of like trigger this, spiraling here, spiraling there, it's like this consistent happiness. And I'm not saying they don't get triggered and they don't get anxious at times, but there's just like this lovely blanket that comes to support them. And so that's sort of how my work goes together.
That's awesome. It is so like you said, all these other methods of microdosing being created by men and just
Mhm.
completely ignoring the cycle. But the cycle applies to everything, and any sort of healing modality should be no different. And honestly, when I started learning about the cycle and started doing all the cycle syncing stuff and everything, I found it a lot easier to stick to my self-care habits, right? Because I was like, at one point, I was trying to meditate 10 minutes every single day of the month and journal every single day of the month. And there are just certain times where like I just need to go on like a really sweaty walk or something. And I just I'm too anxious to sit down and journal. And other times where I could just write for an hour. So I love that you started to combine those things. And like you said, just kind of a download from the universe. It's so crazy how when things align like that, and you're like, oh, this is what I'm meant to be
Mm.
doing. No one else is doing this. This is my calling. And that's so powerful.
One thing I do want to point out too about what you had mentioned, and something I had forgotten to mention, is another key part of the work that I do is based on the female nervous system, right? And so the female nervous system and the menstrual cycle, yes, kind of go hand in hand for a lot of people. But what we are also seeing in some recent studies over the last like less than 10 years is that the female nervous system is vastly more sensitive in the second half of the cycle. And so, like what you said, cyclical self care is like a key thing. And we have to be able to shift dynamically based on what it is that we need day to day. And so, when we understand that the bullshit out there people are touting as nervous system regulating. I'm looking at cold plunges. I'm looking at Wim Hof breath work. Like, I love that on a certain, like 3 days of my cycle. It's that ovulation. In our summer, I can handle that. The rest of the time, that makes me dysregulated. And so when women are out there saving Instagram posts of these hacks that are getting touted by anybody and everybody to help regulate their nervous system, but they don't understand that the female nervous system is different, fundamentally different, and also fundamentally tied to the cycle because of the way that the vagus nerve lands in the cervical region of the womb and is deeply aligned to the HPA axis, which is hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland axis, which impacts the cycle, deeply impacted by stress. It's like, no wonder people are out there thinking they're going to get regulated by doing a cold plunge every day. And the day before their period, they're like in there for 3 minutes. I'm like, are you shitting me? Like, this is crazy. So, learning to align your self care, learning to see the things that are on the internet with like a grain of salt. Like, if a dude's touting it, I mean, I don't center men in my life. I'm sure as fuck not going to center them in my like healing journey.
Right.
So it's just interesting it's interesting to just pay attention to those things. But I really did love what you said. Like, you've noticed that you got to shift it up. And that's the beauty of a cycle. It's the beauty of being a woman. I told my husband last week as I was luteal, about to have my period, I'm like, God, it must be so boring to be the same every day.
It's
Gosh,
true.
how normal. How
I
normal
know.
of you.
I wouldn't trade being a woman for anything. Like I mean, I have endometriosis. I don't always have the easiest cycles. I had the craziest ovulation cramps this morning when I woke up, and I still would not trade it for anything. It would be boring. My life would be so boring. And I love how you brought up the cold plunges too, because when that really started, it became this huge fad. I was losing my mind because I was like, this is all data on men. And then when they finally did start to do some research on women, they also found not only does it matter where you're at in your cycle, it also, women don't need to be it doesn't need to be as drastic for women to get the same benefits.
Exactly.
So I just turned my shower cold for a minute at the end, and I don't do it a few days before my period and the first few days of my period. I just stay with the warm water. And it is supposed to have the same, what's it called? Hormetic effect. Is that what it's called? Yeah.
I think maybe. Yeah. But
Something
you're right.
like
We need it to be like, I was reading, it's like 60 degrees.
Yeah.
We don't need to be out here being Joe Rogan with his like
Right.
30-degree psychotic methods.
Like a literal ice bath. Like, no.
For sure. And I will say, I like ice bathing when it's appropriate. I think it's very it's been very helpful for me in a lot of places. Like when I feel like I'm below my threshold and I'm kind of in this state of like, not quite burnout, because I don't think it's appropriate for people with burnout, but I think it's okay if you're like feeling really numb, or if you're feeling like you're disassociating more often and you need some type of an activation to get you back into your window of tolerance. Like, I think it's okay for you if it's also at a cyclically appropriate time. And that's really just like that phrase, is it cyclically appropriate? That could like change people's lives. Like, just, is it, and it's like, if it's a yes, then okay. If it's a no, then like that's it. That's a full sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And it has taken stress off for me. I did a whole episode about this where I was like, because I kept seeing people online talking about how cycle syncing is like a toxic term and it's just stressing people out. And so I made a whole episode where I was like, look, you can call it whatever you want. If you want to call it cycle awareness, that's fine. It's all the same thing. If it's stressing you out, you're not doing it right. Like, I hate to break it to you, but it's supposed to be freeing. Cause like I said, all of a sudden when I started paying attention to my cycle and I realized like I can't sit and meditate and journal every single day. I don't always have the capacity for it. All of a sudden I was like, just listening to my body. I was like, does this feel good for me today? No? Okay, next. What else can I do to help my mental health, to take care of myself? What does feel good today? And it just took the stress off completely. And so if you're freaking out over what vegetable and what protein you're supposed to have today because it's the first day of your period. Like, that's, you need to start slower, and you need to just ask, is it cycle appropriate? That's really all you need to be asking.
Well, what's fascinating, I had not heard that this is like a thing people were arguing about on the internet, but like I was that person. I always call it I was masculinating my menstrual cycle. I was
Yes.
trying to force it. So when
Yeah.
I first started this, and I think that happens with folks who are feeling really dysregulated and are feeling or have a lot of physical symptoms. It makes perfect sense that we want to do anything and everything we can to feel better. And because of some of the key books out there, some of which are on these bookshelves behind me, right? I'm looking at you, Elisa Vitti, which I love her work. But like
Have
she
it
had
right
a,
here.
yeah, like her shit. And that's the book. That's the
Yeah.
one that will, if you're not careful, get you
Yes.
stuck into hustle culture
Yes.
masquerading as cyclical living.
Mhm.
There's no right or wrong reason. Like, let me just be so fucking honest. Like, there is really not a right or a wrong way to do this. The only wrong way would be not doing it, right? To
Mhm.
just say, I don't really give a shit. And that was certainly
Mhm.
me for the first 30 something years of my life. But like, I fell into that trap of thinking I had to eat this seed this day, do this workout this week, eat this type of protein. God. Oh, and you know what happened? I did that as I was coming off of my pill, and I'd been on the pill for like 15-ish years. My period did not come back for like 8 or 9 months. And the thing that finally helped me get my period back was releasing all of those rules. And so, yeah, cycle syncing can absolutely become just something that masquerades as another hustle culture, diet culture, wellness trend, keeping you disassociated from your body under this belief that you have to follow a certain rigid set of rules. But all that truly is like toxic masculine energy that's trying to like fuck with your brain that says,
Yes.
if I don't do this right, I'm wrong. When in
Yes.
reality, and we don't really have a lot of this, right? This sovereignty, this like ability to trust ourselves. Even me at that point, I was really looking at the Western medical model to be like, tell me why my period's not here. What's happening? And in reality, I needed to just chill the fuck out. Now, I was also burnt out because I had a really crazy job in TV. But like the second I slowed down and started womb healing and cyclical living are not the same thing. And when I started to actually tap into the womb and touch into the womb energy, that's, I think, when things started to really like,
Yeah. Yeah. I so relate to all that because that was my first, like, In the Flow by Lisa VT was kind of my first like real entrance into I always say that I got into like the cyclical stuff, women's health through Instagram University because I was seeing these things pop
yeah,
up. And then that was the first book that I bought about it because it was like recommended and everything. And look, it's super informative. It definitely was like a good introduction. But like you said, you really do have to be careful because I also fell into that trap for a little bit where I was just like freaking out about everything. I literally just I had to stop myself this morning because my boyfriend and I went to breakfast and I just ovulated like yesterday. And so salmon is a great protein around ovulation. It's also a great protein around your period because the omega-3s can help with the pain. So like it's not
it's a
as
great
rigid.
protein, period. Like, let's be
Exactly.
very clear.
Exactly. And so I was like sitting there was like a lox omelet or something that I was kind of like, oh, I feel like I would usually kind of gear towards that around the time that I'm ovulating especially, but there was just something else in the menu that sounded so much better to me in that moment, and I was like, "Oh, but, like, the salmon would be really good," and I was like, "Literally, who cares?" Like, I eat salmon on a fairly regular basis. It's
Mhm.
not a big deal if I don't eat it this morning if I'm not in the mood for it, so you're so right, you really do have to be very careful with like you said, masculinizing
Yeah,
the cycle because that's yeah, there's no room for that. Don't if you masculinize it, it's not going to feel good. It's going to
right.
start to feel shameful just in a different way.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, you definitely got to be careful with that. I would love to talk. So you said like womb healing and cyclical living are separate things. I would love to unpack the womb healing a little bit also for people who maybe have never heard of it and also just why as women we carry so much shame and trauma in our womb.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, first things first, what I would just let folks know, because you may have listeners who don't have a womb, right, anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think that the womb and the uterus are the same thing. Like, I think the womb itself is more than an organ. I see the womb as the center of your creative energy. It's truly where you birth life and where you take life into the body if you're a female and you're having heterosexual sex, right? If you're taking in the male member. And for me, the reason why I started to notice that that was a place that held a lot of shame and trauma was because I had such an issue around sex. I had such an issue around sexual shame. As I mentioned before, I got herpes at age 18, about 4 weeks after I lost my virginity. And so my entire sexual life has been clouded in the big scarlet H of herpes. And I got it in 2005, which was a hella sus time period for us millennials, where it was basically like, oh my God, this is like tantamount to like complete ostracization. You're never going to have good sex. Like, oh my God, you're so dirty.
Scarlet
And it didn't
letter.
help that, like, at my university, they gave us like the sex ed talks, and it was like these huge presentations where you just saw a bunch of like sores and genitals covered in things. And it was just like, wow. So for me, when I started to work with my menstrual cycle and started to actually, well, let me back it up a little further. When I had my spiritual awakening in 2018, 2019, the overarching thing I kept hearing in meditation was you've got to come off of hormonal birth control if you ever want to know what it's truly like to be a woman. And if you really want to connect with your divine feminine energy, you've got to quit the pill. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that everyone should do that. I was blessed to be in a relationship with a man who was like, "Oh, you wouldn't want to have kids and you don't want to be on the pill. I will go get a vasectomy." So that's our birth control. And so if you're not in a stage to do that, please don't quit the pill. But for me, that's how it was, right? And so when I quit the pill and then I fell into that trap of thinking I had to do everything right to get my period back and got more stressed out, finally, what clicked for me was doing a couple of key things to connect with the womb. One being womb massage, which is just belly massage, right? And I have a long history of eating disorders. And so that was triggering to touch the belly, right? To like touch it in a way that wasn't shameful or judgmental. But when I started to little by little allow myself to be present enough to experience pleasure, the pleasure simply of my own self touch, not even in a sexual way, just the sensual way, that started to help me slow down enough to realize maybe we should question some of these rules. Maybe we should question some of this like rigidity that I had charts in like multiple rooms of the house. Like, here's what we eat this week and this week. Psychotic. But and that's very much me, right? Like that's that's a little key insight into Leslie. A little ADHD with a flare of shame, perfectionism, elder daughter. So I started to do these massages and I started to work with a woman whose name is Rosie Reese out of Australia. She owns a company called Yoni Pleasure Palace. And she had this group membership called the Golden Yoni Membership. It was really about sacred sex. It was rooted in Tantra, but there wasn't a ton of Tantra specific teachings. But she was very much about womb massage, breast massage, the energetics of the female body. And so I was in that membership in 2020 using things like rose quartz dildos versus silicone dildos and yoni eggs. And for me, those really became ways for me to slow down and to start tapping into the energetics of the womb. And what that meant for me was, okay, tapping into my creativity, tapping into my empowerment, tapping into my intuition. If you'd asked me previous to my awakening what intuition was, I don't think I could have really figured it out for you. Like, I didn't get it. I think it was because, like I said before, I was so disconnected from my body. My inner voice was the ruminating hamster wheel thoughts up here. And so connecting to my womb allowed me finally to like understand what intuition truly was and what it felt like in my body to hear intuition versus fear. And so the next thing I started to do were these internal massages of the vaginal canal. You might hear them called cervical dearmoring or vaginal dearmoring, but basically what it is it's an internal, almost trigger point massage with a glass or crystal dildo of the outside of the vulva, right? And the inside of the vaginal canal. And you can think of it like the vulva as a clock. You would massage at 12, 3, 6, and 9, and then go slightly deeper into the vaginal canal, 12, 3, 6, 9, maybe a little bit deeper, and sort of around and around the circle while breathing, moving slowly, and allowing the dildo or the glass wand to really bring some pressure to the places within the body, very much like a normal massage, but internal. And while doing that and pairing it with breath work one day, I was about like 2 or 3 inches into my vaginal canal in the upper right side, and I felt this pinch, and then I felt like this pins and needles sensation. And in my mind, I heard this dude's voice that I had dated after I got divorced say, "You fat bitch." Like, wait a second. I have not thought of this guy in years. What was that? That was so weird. And so you had asked, why do we hold trauma? How are we holding shame? How are we holding these stored memories in that space? Well, that for me just like clearly solidified, wait a second, there's something to all of this chatter that the body keeps the score and that there are cellular memories tied to places in the body. And I had had sex with that guy. So I'm like, well, his energy is
Mm.
there. And not even just his energetic imprint, the fucked up things he said to me are there in my subconscious. And so, of course, I cried and I continued to breathe and I continued the massage. But I share that story with people because for me, that solidified the link between the womb space being a place in the body that deeply holds on to our memories, our thoughts, our beliefs, our negative self talk. It doesn't have to be from another person, right? So
Mhm.
much of my own like trigger around massaging my belly, I think was also connected to the like stored in the womb because of how I felt about my body since I was like in the middle of my teens. The other thing that I think is really interesting about womb healing and womb work, right, is that at least in the way that I do it, it really does deepen the mystical connection women can have between themselves and the divine because from my perspective, women are the goddess. We are the divine manifest here. And for me and my very deeply religious upbringing versus my now very goddess centered spirituality, it was the connection to the womb, the connection to sensuality and to pleasure that finally showed me that all the things I had been taught as a kid about Sky Daddy were probably not actually true for me. And not only they not feel true for me anymore, they felt really restrictive and really deeply shameful and really deeply othering. And following my womb's wisdom and allowing myself to go on these mystical journeys where I would, you know, eat mushrooms and meditate and see myself going into this cave. And I have like a very distinct, like I get to my cave in a very specific way. I've done this meditation countless times. Like your cave will look different, but like going into this cave, venturing down into it, lots of imagery and seeing the goddess there. Surprise, she's herself. It's you. But like she's there. She gives you insights, right? She awakens your own intuition. All of that work for me, yes, played into the cycle because there were certain times in the cycle that I find it more potent, like late luteal menstrual, download central,
Mhm.
divine channel,
Yes.
eat mushrooms while bleeding, do some sex magic, get it all. Like you get all the answers that you need. But for me, the reason I had said that it's different is because you can do cyclical living and not care for your womb. Because I was doing that. And you can do womb healing without a womb. I think that people who have had hysterectomies can benefit maybe more than anybody else at this point from womb healing because they've had it removed. And that's an additional like fascia level trauma.
Mhm.
So that's, I guess, what I mean by that. I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. I think there's so much good stuff on that actually that I want to talk about. First of all, I love how you said that the womb being separate from the uterus, especially for because I do have a lot just being in the endometriosis space. I know that there are listeners who have had their uterus removed for that
Of course.
reason. But the womb being more of an energetic like spiritual space in your body and not just the physical organ is
Mhm.
a really helpful way to look at it, and I think probably a truer way to look at it. Because even if you don't have your physical uterus or you had a partial hysterectomy or whatever, you're so right. The womb healing probably would be even more potent for those people. I also love I can relate a lot, and I'm sure there are listeners out there who can relate a lot too, to the religious upbringing to womb trauma pipeline. It is so real, and it's still something I continue to unpack, and I do a lot of, like, EFT tapping, trying to uncover all
Mhm.
these limiting beliefs, subconscious breakthrough questions, and a lot of it like, I've kinda started to default to be like, "Okay, well, let me start with church. What did I hear in church? What Bible story contributes to this limiting belief that I'm trying to work on, because I've realized that so much of it has come from that. And that
Mhm.
a lot of my, because growing up, I thought that I was going to save sex for marriage.
Yep,
And I
same.
thought that, for a pretty long time, even when I was in college, that was like my whole idea, that that was what I was going to do. And as I started to question and deconstruct, I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like
Mhm.
it just doesn't feel right. Something feels very unnatural about it. And I said sky daddy, that whole with just, yeah, some man in the sky. I think so often that it is so absurd. Like, I just think it is absurd on a whole other level to think that an omnipotent, like all-knowing, powerful being, source, creator of the universe, whatever you want to call it, would have a gender, you know? And
Mhm.
if it did have a gender, it would not be male. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And so the things that I grew up hearing in church, and I was deeply, honestly, my household wasn't very religious. I was the one,
Mm.
I latched onto it. I'm also the oldest daughter. I had a huge
Mm.
purity complex, good girl
Mm.
complex. And so I
The
latched
best.
on to religion. Yeah. And I went to the conferences and I read the Bible and I went to youth group and I was just so invested in it. And as I got older, I realized how that seriously damaged my relationship with my sexuality
Mm.
and with my womb space.
Mhm.
And I do, honestly, I notice improvements in my endometriosis with a lot of the energetic stuff that I've been doing, because I did
Mhm.
everything else. I did the anti-inflammatory diet. I lead a fairly healthy lifestyle. I've had excision surgery. At
Mm.
this point, this is something that's really making a big
Mm.
impact on my life, unpacking those things.
So I have seen some pretty epic, I'm not saying you should eat mushrooms, but maybe you should.
I would love to,
I
honestly.
have seen some, pretty amazing client, like, shifts around endometriosis because of exactly what you just said. The shift in the acceptance of self, the shift in the acceptance of the womb is not this thing that is a battleground, but this is a place for me to really accept myself at the deepest level. And back to what you had said about how you have been seeking for you've been seeking something. You were seeking for something and the thing that you sought for this wisdom was outside of yourself and it turned into something that became something that attacked yourself through it.
Mhm.
For me, I love to learn. Like I'm a human design 1-3. I want to know all the things. And I want to I have to know why. Like I'm a
Yeah.
very why person. I remember as a kid like wondering why there weren't like more women in the Bible and why in the Bible the women that were there were like Esther or Ruth or Mary or the slut, Mary Magdalene, heaven forbid. And when I started to have my spiritual awakening, I was very anti, like, I don't want to look at the Bible again. Like, I don't want to like dig around in it and see. But as I grew and really started to work with, different archetypal feminine deities, Hecate was certainly like the first. She's the goddess of witches. I was certainly like very interested in her. Then really got very interested in Lilith's story. And now I'm very interested in Mary Magdalene's story. But I guess what I would say to that is you had said when you started to uncover your limiting beliefs, you started to go back to religion first and see, like, is this true for me or not? When I started to do my menstrual cycle really work and really start to like look at the energetics of the womb, I started to look back at where did I learn what it was to be a woman? Who taught me that? And that for me was it was church. It was religion. And I don't think in my specific church and my dad for sure who had two daughters, I don't think that they were very like I don't consciously remember them being very like be meek, be subservient. That was not our brand of religion. It was all the outside bullshit from all the purity culture and the rest of the world. Like, regardless of if you've ever been to church or you're raised religious or not, you have been impacted by religion because this is how this world operates. And certainly now, it's wild as hell. But when we look back 3 to 5,000 years ago, that's where this started. Previous to that, human history has been going on for thousands, tens of thousands of years. And in those years, we were not worshiping, like you said, a male deity. We were worshiping female deities. Like look at some of the very first statues we have are goddess deities like the Venus of Willendorf and all of these like sacred, like big titty, big belly, like big hipped little figurines. Like they worshiped the goddess because they understood that if it just made sense, like if women create through birth, then the divine would also be in this body. And when we lost that through a very orchestrated attack by patriarchal religions from all across the world, right? It's not just Christianity. When we lost that connection to her, we lost that connection to ourselves. And being a witch, I mean, we could also talk about the witch trials, the burning times, all of those things that were deeply insidious attacks on the female body. But I think for me, what it really boiled down to was, and sort of what we've talked about, what is true for me? What is true for me? And is this a belief I've had because it's actually mine? Or is it a belief that I've had because of someone else? I had to do that for my menstrual work. I had to do that when I started to eat mushrooms because I was a post Reagan Dare girl. Like I won a
Yeah.
t-shirt decorating contest in third grade. Like, this is your brain on drugs. And I'm like, look at me now. So I had to do that deprogramming and
Yeah.
that questioning. And a lot of what I say my job is to help people question the world around them so that they learn themselves more deeply. I did it as a news anchor for 15 years, questioning the world around me. And now it's very much more about your internal compass and your internal world. So if you're listening and you're resonating with any of these things we've talked about, it's like, yeah, what is it that you need to question? And what types of answers are you getting? Because just because it's the norm does not necessarily mean that it's true and sovereignly right for you.
Yeah. I think the questioning is a key part in critical thinking, which is something that is seriously lacking
Correct. Yeah.
in the
It's
world
only
today. And that's what I mean, I credit college to me deconstructing from religion and becoming more spiritual and more connected with myself because I was in a STEM degree. I have a degree in neuroscience. Like it's not like I was taking these like woo crazy classes, but I was taught critical thinking skills,
Mhm.
skills that I certainly had. I was always, an intelligent child, but I was taught not to use my critical thinking skills because even in school, it's like you have to do math this way, even if it doesn't
Right.
make sense to you that way and you can get the answer a different way, you have to do it this way. You have to write your essays this way. It's incorrect to do it any other way. And they kind of beat that out of you through the public
Mhm.
school system. And then when I got to college, it was an adjustment. But as I started to learn, even with scientific classes, of when people think that it's more objective and not something that can be questioned, that is the entire basis of science is
Mm.
questioning things. And so I was kind of retaught these critical thinking skills. And as I applied them to other parts of my life is when I really started to have a crazy identity shift. And I honestly feel like since that point in my life, since 18, the past 7 years of my life, almost 7, 8 years, I've been just shedding skins. Like up level, up level, up level, up level
Mhm.
in this
Mhm.
regard because I have started to question things. And I think that is ultimately the the goal for a civilized society is to have people questioning things and stop trying to impose everything on
Mhm.
everybody else. What works for you, what is true for you might not resonate with somebody else and it's not right or wrong
Mhm.
and it's not affecting you. So why do you care so much? I think if more people had that mentality, like that could apply to so many different things
For sure.
in the modern day. Yeah, I really want to get more into that, the history of like worshiping the goddess and stuff. Like I have so many things on my to be read list because I really want to like dive into that more because it's so fascinating to me. And I think I have started to say when talking about like history and the oppression of women and all that, I've started to say recorded history
Mm,
because that's what we're talking about.
yeah.
But like history was matriarchal. It put
Yeah.
families in the center. It put children and women in the center. It worshipped the goddesses. And like you said, they weren't these like tiny little like little waist like you said like they had big bellies, big boobs, like they were full real women
Mhm.
and they're beautiful and they are they were worshipped. And the sooner we can get back to that, the sooner we can heal as a society. And that's what I mean. I really feel like there's a reckoning coming. I have no idea what it's going to be, when it's going to be.
Yeah.
It does feel like it though.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting too, not to like throw you on like a new rabbit hole to go down, but the rise of Ozempic
Hmm. Hmm.
is very much part of the death rattle of this patriarchal world system that we live in. I don't know if it'll be over and collapse like in our lifetimes. Could take longer than that, but like we are absolutely living in a quantum shift because the resurgence of very skinny. First of all, if you do the research and if you walk it back, diet culture is deeply rooted in white supremacist and Puritan Christianity. And when we look at how many people are obsessed with starving themselves with the help now of some pharmaceutical drug, it's like when you can't think, when your brain doesn't have the nutrients, then you don't fight. You don't
Hmm.
question. And so like that for me really helped in my eating disorder recovery to be like, okay, why do I think this way is the way to look beautiful? Where did this come from for me? What has this kept me from doing? That for me is like, how much time am I wasting thinking this way, trying to be this way? And what was the underlying root of that? Going on that like fact finding mission, digging around, self archaeology, like just trying to like figure out the roots for me was really helpful and really healing. Again, and I think like you mentioned, it is deeply, I mean, we live in a time right now where things, it's like on one hand, you have all of the access to the things you could ever want. Like you've got access to all the information. And then you have all this access to incredibly divisive, problematic, violent, hurtful, any adjective, negative one that you can think of, rhetoric as well. And because of the lack of critical thinking skills that have been like decimated in the last 20
Hmm.
years, people have to wake up. And for me, and I'll share this too, because it kind of relates back to like when I started to eat mushrooms, the pandemic shifted so much for me. I was a news anchor. I was the one on the news, like, and like,
Yeah.
wear your mask and get your vaccine and la di da. And deeply mentally ill, like deeply anxious, deeply depressed, deeply burnt out, got diagnosed with PTSD during that part. And I started to realize like we do not have a loving government. Like the government does not give a shit about you, truly. And so when I started to explore psychedelic medicine, and for me as a good girl, well, this is bad. This is illegal in some places. Well, how come it's legal here and across the state line it's different? Like that doesn't make sense. I'm still a human, they're still a human. How do we have these different rules and laws? Well, when I started to really dissect why it is the way it is, it's not because there's a loving government out there that cares if you get high, trip balls and fall off your roof. It's because when you question things and think critically about things and understand you're ungovernable, you start to make problems. For me, I think what's been such a big shift for myself is like you start to see that there's not a real reason to fight. There's not a real reason to hate each other. And people in power need the ones that they're in power over to be fighting each other so they don't fight the ones in power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of that is that's my soapbox and my TED talk.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even if you like the drug schedule is something that infuriates me to no end because I took psychopharmacology back in 2021. It was like shortly after COVID. And we were talking about how the drug schedule came to be. And guess what, guys? It has absolutely nothing to do with health. It has nothing to do with safety. It has nothing to do with science. All it has to do with racism. That is
Mm,
all it has to do with. Because if the definition on the drug schedule of a Schedule 1 drug is highly addictive and no medicinal benefits, those are the top two like reasons to get scheduled to have a drug scheduled 1. Marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug. As far as we know, it's like the least addictive thing out there. That and psychedelics
mm.
do not have high addictive potentials. And they have crazy medicinal benefits. And it's not that they did not know this back when the drug schedule was created. the 70s, the 60s and 70s were psychedelic central. It was being used for so much healing. And these are millennia old medicinal drugs. We have known about the medicinal benefits for a very long time. So it's not that they were scheduled out of ignorance to the actual science behind it. They knew.
Mm-hmm.
It was because marijuana came over from Mexico and they wanted to arrest brown people. It's because, opium, for example,
Mm-hmm.
in the West with all of the immigration from Asia, they wanted to arrest Asian people. And cocaine. Now, look, arguably, cocaine's not super safe. However, crack cocaine was
Right.
considered to be worse than, other forms of cocaine because crack was associated with Black men. This goes so deep. And so if you are also part of like that, the good girl club where you were like raised that way and the purity culture and you're like, no, drugs are bad. If that is still ingrained in you, 100% agree. Going back to the roots of how these
Mm-hmm.
things came to be can be so healing and so like revolutionizing. Like that whole
Yeah.
thing, like what radicalized you? Literally, how much time do you have?
Right. Plants and my pussy radicalized me.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
This has been such a good conversation. I feel like we could talk forever, and I'd love to do another interview in the future. Also, if you ever have you written a book? You haven't.
I have
I
not.
didn't,
No.
didn't see. Okay, I was gonna say I didn't see anything like on your website. Or anything. If you ever write a book, I think you should. I'd be the first to read it. I do have one last question that I like to ask all of my guests. So, if you could rewrite the health class curriculum that every woman deserves, what would your first lesson be?
This is such a good question. Oh my goddess, what would I say? My first lesson in the health class that we deserve. It would be like from a very like a fifth like 5-year-olds. It would be like early,
Mhm.
like the babies. They would learn that the menstrual cycle and the period is something that is sacred and special and exciting and life affirming and new and powerful. And so that they would be like jazzed to get their period. And then you teach the boys, those who don't have periods, not born in female bodies, how to like really be excited about the wisdom that comes from like somebody being in your life that doesn't have the same shit happen every day. Like I said to my husband, I'm like, man, it must be so boring to think consistently every day. But like the downloads that I get when I'm like mystically in my period, like I think that would be fabulous and have that be like from the tiniest of ages. And I'm low key trying to do that with my nieces and nephews. Like they know when Aunt Leslie has her period because she's like doing certain things. But I think that's what I
Yeah.
would talk. I would be like, period is your superpower. Welcome to kindergarten.
Yes. Yes. That's amazing. I love that. And I love like the earlier the better because I think so many people they associate with the shame and the stigma. And then just women are so sexualized in every aspect that it's like the menstrual cycle is always associated with sex as well. So people are like,
Right.
you can't tell a 5-year-old about it. And it's like there are age appropriate
Sure.
conversations to have. You can talk about what happens in the female body without introducing the idea of sex at the age of 5. And there are so many ways to do that and it would be so empowering. And yeah, you'd get them excited to get their period. Like
Yeah.
how amazing would that be if we had more young girls that were like, "Oh my god, I can't wait to cycle."
Yeah.
That would
Like
be
I'm
so
going to have
cool.
so many cool powers. And
Yes.
like what a fabulously new generation of other folks who don't bleed that would be leaning into the really interesting cyclical nature. Cause taking it back to our ancestors, that's what they did. Like the
Yeah.
elders would go to the bleeding people while they bled and be like, where should we hunt? What downloads are you getting from the divine this month? Like, what's going on with this? What's going on with this? Like, how are we like mediating conflict? Like all of that stuff could be really helpful. And again, like this lesson would be like community building. It would be like
Mhm.
community building under like the
Yes.
umbrella of know your body, know yourself. But if because here's the
Yes.
thing, if you are teaching a child where the no-no zones are, then they're old enough to know this about themselves. And they have to
Exactly.
learn that earlier now because people are sick.
Well, exactly. And they need to know the anatomical names for things as well. Like
Yes.
vulva is not a bad word, okay? And we
Right.
don't do the same thing for penis. Like I think a lot of young boys could say that that's their penis, but there are very few young girls that can tell you what your vagina is, what your cervix is, what your vulva is. Because we're all
The
like, you can't
labia.
teach, the labia. You can't teach a kid about sex. I'm not teaching a kid about sex. I'm teaching about the things that are on
Preach.
their own body. And I
Autumn
also
will be
love
my
how you,
co-teacher in this class.
yes, absolutely. Sign me up. Because, I also love the point that you make about, getting downloads when you're bleeding, like that being your most, because I had, it didn't like blow up, but I got quite more comments than usual on a TikTok from a few months ago when I was talking about how when you are bleeding, you aren't crazy and hormonal. Like people love to call you hormonal when you're on your period. Your hormones are the lowest at that time. Your sex hormones are the lowest they're going to get the entire cycle when you start your bleed. And I think that's a big reason as to why we're more connected to the divine during that time, because you don't have like estrogen really affects your brain, and progesterone both
Mhm.
really affect your brain in profound ways. And when you're ovulating, you make rasher decisions, like start paying attention to it. You'll make
Yeah.
rasher decisions around ovulation and more impulsive decisions. And estrogen is like a social lubricant. You're going to like
Mhm.
people a little bit more when you're ovulating, and you're not going to have time for their bullshit when you're on your period. D- that clarity and that like the lower levels of hormones at that time, I think is really what opens women up to the divine, to the universe, to these higher level downloads, to, like you said, all time happening at once, bringing it back to just those multitudes of whatever you want to call it, universes or spaces or time, whatever, is because of that those days that we get every month where we have that space. Nature just creates that space for
Yeah.
us. So it's
What I'll also
beautiful.
say to that is what I say, and I learned this in my training, and obviously I don't have a neuroscience background, so this could be bullshit. But what I learned was that in the days you're bleeding, the line that separates the left and right hemispheres, that like veil between the
Hmm.
sides actually thins, and it's easier for you to communicate right to left side of the brain and back and forth. And so that's why, but also like the literal veil thinning in that
Hmm.
death, being a woman is a psychedelic experience when you want to live it like that. Like the death and the release that comes with your bleed, and like the rejuvenating rebirth that happens as your bleed ends. That's again, and again, hormonal. Like you said, like the hormones are rising afterwards. That is also a reason why I think that the downloads happen so much. And to what you said about ovulation, luteal phase is like my favorite phase. That's
Hmm.
an unpopular opinion, but I love it. Luteal
I
phase is
agree.
like I am like don't fuck with me energy. When I struggle the most is in the follicular and ovulation phases. And I have a longer cycle. And now I'm in perimenopause, so it's an irregular cycle. It's joy for me. But like I started to notice when I tracked my cycle that I would have like this, and I had it yesterday at the gym, feminine rage, girl. And I'm like on day 7, say day 8. My bleed's
Hmm.
been over for a few days. The estrogen's peaking. And I'm like,
Hmm.
this man did not re-rack his waist, and I want to commit homicide and you have on flip-flops. Yeah. So it was just like a whole thing. So like, yeah,
Yes.
the things that you think you know about your cycle, unless you start to really look at it and live in alignment with, it might not be true for you. And so for me, that was really interesting to like go into all this training with folks who were like, oh, PMS. And I didn't have a lot of PMS. I had this like different issue that I hadn't heard a lot of folks talking about. And it's follicular
Hmm.
irritation.
Yes.
And I will say that for me, I know if I don't rest enough in my period, like when I have my period, if I still try to work out when I have my period, which I did this past month because I have a new trainer and she didn't listen. We won't be doing that again. I'm like, this is why the rage is here. This is why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't allow, if you don't like allow yourself that time, you really have to give like extra time for self-care then in that first half of your cycle, because you had to push through for whatever reason. When you had such low levels of hormones, because then what you're doing is running on cortisol mainly,
Yep.
and that can have its own damaging effects then in the future. But yeah, I love that. And I agree. My anxiety is worse around ovulation. I don't sleep as well when I'm ovulating. My
Mm.
anxiety heightens. And it's kind of like an existential anxiety, quite honestly. It's like, even if it's not super in my life, it's more of like it can manifest in different ways. Like this month, it was really like a doubt in my own capabilities that it was coming up as. And so I really had to, was like, okay, I'm going to do like a full tapping session
Hmm.
and work through this because I was like, where did this come from? I'm not typically one to doubt myself.
Where are you in your
Yeah,
cycle now? Are you ovulating now? So it
yeah, I
was a
like
month ago.
just ovulated yesterday.
So this
Yeah,
is
and it
coming
was
up. This
this,
has come up recently.
yes, this was literally like just this past week that I was like, I'm overwhelmed. How am I can't do this. Like, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to do? Start a business, build a podcast. Who am I? So yeah, I really had to had to work on that. And it subsided. The tapping did help
Mm.
quite a lot. But yeah, this conversation, this is just so multifaceted. We could literally talk for so long. I will link your website and everything down below. Where else can people find you? Are you on social media?
Yeah, for sure. So
Awesome.
I have had the most fun this summer on TikTok. So you can find me on TikTok at the Womb Mystic. I'm on Instagram at Leslie Draffin. I have my own podcast, The Light Within. And I've got free guides if you want to find out more about how to microdose in tune with your cycle. I actually have a 5-day free mini course on the cyclical microdosing method that might be perfect for you to add to the show notes. That puts you on my email list, which is where all the juicy stuff goes down. I do one-on-one coaching. I have a group program membership, I guess you'd call it as well. If you want to dip your toe into my world, those are the good places to go.
Awesome. I will link all of that below for everybody listening. Thank you guys so much. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love if you could rate it, leave a review. If you're on Spotify, you can go on the Spotify comments and send it to a friend. Send it to one of your other, victims of the good girl mentality who needs a little bit of motivation or inspiration these days. Thank you guys so much for listening. I will see you all next week and class dismissed.